Naomi froze at her own front door when the maid didn't open it for her, because the maid wasn't waiting for her anymore. She was waiting for Vanessa, the woman who wasn't supposed to belong there, and in that single second Naomi understood something had already been taken from her long before she ever noticed. Inside, the air felt wrong, colder, rearranged, her white lilies replaced with roses she never chose, her heels echoing across marble that no longer answered to her name, and at the end of the hallway stood Ethan, calm, composed, standing beside Vanessa as if this had always been the plan. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet shift of power that felt louder than any betrayal. Naomi didn't ask questions, because the truth was already written in every detail around her, in the way the staff looked past her, in the way Vanessa touched the back of a chair that used to be hers, in the way Ethan said nothing, and in that silence. Naomi realized the most dangerous thing wasn't that her husband had let another woman into their home, it was that he had slowly let that woman replace her, piece by piece, until the house no longer recognized its own wife, and as Naomi stepped fully inside, something in her decided without a word that this would be the last time she ever needed permission to exist in a place she once called home. Vanessa did not raise her voice, she did not need to, because the power she held was quiet and precise, the kind that showed itself in small decisions that no one questioned, like the way breakfast was served 15 minutes earlier than usual, like the way Naomi's favorite chair by the window was now occupied before she even walked into the room, like the way the staff no longer asked Naomi what she wanted but instead waited for Vanessa to nod first. Ethan sat at the head of the table, reading emails, untouched by the shift that was happening in plain sight, or maybe he saw it and chose comfort over truth, which was worse. Naomi noticed everything, the new scent in the air, the change in tone, the invisible line that had been drawn around her life, and yet no one said a word about it. That was the cruelty of it. The betrayal was no longer hidden, it was normalized. Later that evening, as guests arrived for a small dinner, Naomi walked into the dining room and stopped for half a second, because her place setting was no longer beside Ethan, it had been moved down the table, subtle enough to deny, obvious enough to wound, and Vanessa stood there, adjusting silverware with a calm smile, as if she had always been the one who belonged there. Ethan looked up, met Naomi's eyes, and then looked away. And in that brief moment, Naomi understood something deeper than betrayal. She understood replacement. This was no longer about an affair, this was about erasure, about being slowly rewritten out of her own life while still living inside it. And as the dinner carried on, with polite laughter and crystal glasses clinking under warm light, Naomi felt the final piece fall into place, because she realized this had not just happened overnight, it had been built, allowed, reinforced, and worst of all, accepted, and somewhere between the silence and the smiles, a single question formed in her mind, sharp and irreversible. If he could watch her disappear this easily, then how long had she truly been gone without knowing it? The laughter from dinner still lingered in the walls long after the guests had left, but the house no longer felt alive, it felt staged, like every moment had been rehearsed without Naomi in it. And as she walked upstairs, her hand brushing the polished railing she once chose herself, she noticed something else, something smaller but sharper. The door to her dressing room was slightly open. She did not rush, she did not call out. She simply stepped inside and stopped, because her world had been rearranged again, not loudly, not violently, but with a quiet precision that felt worse. Vanessa's dresses now hung between hers, colors Naomi would never wear, fabrics that did not belong, yet they were placed there as if they had always shared the same space, as if there had never been a boundary. Naomi moved closer, her fingers hovering over the hangers, and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume filled the air, not overwhelming, just present enough to claim territory. Behind her, she heard footsteps, slow, confident, unhurried, and when she turned, Vanessa leaned against the doorway, watching, not apologizing, not explaining, just observing, as if Naomi's reaction was part of the evening's entertainment. For a brief second, silence stretched between them, heavy but controlled, and then Vanessa spoke softly, saying Ethan preferred things this way now, as if that sentence alone could justify everything. Naomi did not respond, because the truth had already landed, not in words, but in placement, in permission, in the fact that this was no longer a secret hidden in shadows. It had been brought into the light and accepted. Later, when Ethan entered the room, he did not look surprised, he did not ask why. Naomi was standing there. He only adjusted his cufflinks and said nothing, and that silence confirmed the final piece Naomi needed, because it was no longer about what Vanessa had taken, it was about what Ethan had given away without ever asking if it was his to give. And as Naomi slowly reached for the back of her wedding dress, feeling the fabric beneath her fingers, one quiet realization settled deep within her: she was not being pushed out. She was being replaced, and the most dangerous part was that no one in this house planned to stop it. Naomi did not raise her voice, she did not confront them, she did not even close the closet door, because something inside her had already gone quiet in a way that no argument could fix, and as Ethan stood there adjusting his cufflinks like nothing had shifted, she finally understood that the moment for explanations had already passed long before this night. She walked past him slowly, her steps measured, her breathing steady, and for the first time, Ethan noticed something unfamiliar: not anger, not sadness, but absence, as if the woman who once filled every corner of this house had begun to withdraw without warning. Downstairs, the light still glowed warm against marble floors, but the warmth no longer reached her, and Naomi moved through the space with a calm that felt almost unreal, pausing only when she reached his office, the one place that had always remained untouched, the one place that still carried the illusion of order. She opened the drawer where she knew everything was kept: documents, contracts, signatures, and she did not hesitate, because this decision had not been made in this moment. It had been building quietly, piece by piece. Every time she was overlooked, every time she was replaced without a word. When Ethan entered behind her, his voice finally broke the silence, asking what she was doing, but there was no authority in it, only confusion, because he had not expected action, only endurance. Naomi placed the papers on the desk, smooth, precise, already prepared, and for the first time, Ethan actually looked at her, really looked, as if trying to understand when control had slipped from his hands. She slid the pen toward him but did not ask him to sign. She did not need to, because this was not a negotiation, this was a conclusion. Her voice, when it came, was calm and even, almost gentle, as she said that a home stops being a home the moment a wife needs permission to exist inside it, and the words did not echo, they settled, heavy and final. Ethan tried to respond, tried to reach for something that could pull this back, but every sentence he formed came too late, because the silence he had chosen before had already answered for him. Naomi removed her ring, placing it beside the document with a soft sound that felt louder than anything spoken that night, and as she turned to leave, she did not look at Vanessa, she did not look back at Ethan, because she understood something neither of them did yet, that the real loss had already happened, and all that remained now was for them to realize it, long after she was gone. The door closed behind Naomi without a sound, but the silence it left behind stretched through every room like something irreversible, and for the first time in years, she stood outside without looking back, not because she was strong, but because there was nothing left inside that still belonged to her. The night air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the world beyond those walls had been waiting for her to step out of a life that had already erased her. She did not call a driver, she did not take anything more than what she could carry in one hand, because the weight she was leaving behind was heavier than anything she could pack. Inside the house, the lights still glowed, but something had shifted in a way Ethan could not name, because control had never looked like this before. It had never walked away without asking permission. Vanessa moved through the space as if nothing had changed, adjusting flowers, giving instructions, claiming rooms. But there was a subtle fracture now, something missing in the rhythm of the house, something she could not replace no matter how perfectly she performed. Ethan stood in his office longer than necessary, staring at the ring left behind, not touching it, not moving it, because for the first time, he felt the absence of something he had never bothered to define. The house was still full, still polished, still impressive, but it no longer held together the way it used to, as if every detail Naomi had once managed quietly had begun to unravel all at once. The next morning came too fast, and for the first time, breakfast did not feel like routine, it felt like a performance, and even though Vanessa sat where she had always wanted to sit, even though everything looked exactly the way she had arranged it, there was an unfamiliar stillness that settled over the table, because the one person who had never demanded space had been the one holding everything in place. Miles away, Naomi sat in the back of a quiet car heading toward a city that did not know her name, her reflection faint in the window as buildings blurred past, and for the first time, her silence felt different, not like something forced on her, but like something she owned. And as she closed her eyes for just a moment, one quiet truth settled in: she had not lost her home, she had left the place that stopped being one long before she walked out. Days passed, then weeks, and the house that once ran with invisible precision began to reveal its fractures in ways no one could ignore, because what Naomi had held together quietly was now unraveling in plain sight. Schedules overlapped, staff turned over, small mistakes stacked into larger ones, and the rhythm that once felt effortless now felt forced, as if every day required twice the effort to achieve half the order. Vanessa moved faster, spoke sharper, filled every silence with direction. But the more she controlled, the more the house resisted, because control was not the same as care, and no amount of instructions could recreate the calm Naomi had built without ever announcing it. Ethan noticed it in moments he could not explain, the way meetings ran late because something at home had already drained his focus, the way he paused at the top of the stairs each morning as if expecting something that was no longer there, the way the house echoed differently when he walked through it alone. At night, the rooms felt larger, colder, as if space itself had expanded in Naomi's absence, and even when Vanessa filled that space with music, with conversation, with presence, it never settled, it never felt complete. One evening, Ethan returned earlier than usual, the city light still low against the horizon, and as he stepped inside, he noticed something that stopped him for a fraction of a second. The air did not carry the same quiet warmth it once had, it felt curated, arranged, but not lived in. Vanessa greeted him with a practiced smile, speaking about plans, events, changes she wanted to make next, but her words blurred together, because for the first time, Ethan was not listening to what was being said, he was noticing what was missing. He walked past her without responding, moving slowly through the house, touching surfaces without realizing it, the back of a chair, the edge of a table, as if searching for something familiar that no longer existed. In his office, the ring still sat where Naomi had left it, untouched, unmoved, and now it no longer felt like a simple object, it felt like a marker of something he had failed to understand when it mattered. He picked it up for the first time, turning it slightly between his fingers, and in that quiet moment, a realization began to form, not loud, not immediate, but steady and undeniable, that what had left his life was not just a person, it was the one presence that had made everything else work. And as that thought settled deeper, another followed right behind it, sharper, harder to ignore, that no matter how much he tried to adjust, to replace, to rebuild around what was gone, there was one truth he could no longer avoid: nothing in this house was actually better without her. And for the first time, the cost of what he had allowed began to feel real. The shift did not explode, it spread, slow and undeniable, reaching beyond the walls of the house and into places Ethan had always kept separate, because what had once been contained was now visible. In the boardroom, his decisions began to carry hesitation, small at first, then harder to ignore, because the clarity he once relied on had been replaced with distraction, and for the first time, people noticed. Meetings ran longer, answers came later, and the quiet confidence that used to define him now felt interrupted, like a rhythm he could not recover. Outside of work, invitations changed tone, friends who once stayed late now left early, conversations that used to feel easy now carried something unspoken. As if everyone could sense a misalignment he refused to name, Vanessa tried to fill that space the same way she had filled the house, with presence, with control, with constant motion, but the more she inserted herself into his world, the more the imbalance grew, because what she offered was visibility, not stability. One afternoon, during a meeting that should have been routine, Ethan paused mid-sentence, his words stopping in a way that had never happened before, and for a brief moment, the room fell into an unfamiliar silence, not respectful, not patient, but uncertain, and in that silence, something inside him tightened, because he realized he was no longer leading the room the way he used to. Later that evening, as he stood alone in the office overlooking the city, the skyline stretched wide and bright, but it no longer felt like something he owned. It felt distant, almost out of reach, and his reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, like a version of himself that had lost something essential without noticing when it happened. Behind him, Vanessa spoke about plans, about appearances, about how things would look from the outside, but her words stayed on the surface, because for the first time, Ethan understood that everything she focused on was what could be seen, while everything he had lost was what could not. He closed his eyes briefly, and in that quiet second, a memory surfaced without warning, not dramatic, not loud, just simple. Naomi adjusting a detail no one else noticed, smoothing over something before it became a problem, creating a sense of order that never asked for recognition. And when he opened his eyes again, the realization was sharper than before, because it was no longer about missing her presence, it was about understanding her value too late. and as that thought settled, another followed, heavier, harder to escape, that the life he was trying to maintain was already beginning to slip, and the one person who could have held it together was the one he had allowed to walk away without a single attempt to stop her. Years did not announce themselves, they passed quietly, layering distance over memory until what once felt immediate became something Ethan could only revisit in fragments, and yet nothing truly disappeared. It waited, patient, for the moment he would be forced to see it clearly. The invitation arrived without significance at first, just another charity gala, another room filled with names, cameras, and expectations. And Ethan accepted out of habit, not anticipation, because events like this had always been routine, predictable, controlled. The night of the gala unfolded the same way it always did, polished floors, soft music, conversations that floated without depth, and for a while, everything felt manageable again, as if time had softened what he had lost. Then the room shifted without warning, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way attention moves when something important enters a space. And Ethan felt it before he saw it, the slight pause in conversations, the way heads turned just enough to notice. When he finally looked, it was not recognition that hit him first, it was contrast, because the woman walking across the room carried a presence that did not ask for space, it defined it, calm, composed, unshaken by the attention that followed her. Naomi had not returned as someone seeking to be seen, she had returned as someone who no longer needed to be overlooked. Her steps were steady, her expression quiet, and everything about her felt intentional in a way that made the room adjust around her rather than the other way around. Ethan stood still, unable to move for a moment longer than he should have, because the difference between who she had been and who she was now was not in appearance, it was in certainty. She no longer carried the weight of being diminished, she carried the clarity of having walked away from it. When she reached the stage, the light settled on her without resistance, and as she began to speak, her voice did not rise to command the room. It simply held it, and for the first time in years, Ethan listened without interruption, without distraction, because every word revealed something he had failed to see when it mattered. Naomi spoke about rebuilding, about dignity, about choosing silence over chaos and strength over recognition, and none of it sounded like a performance, it sounded like truth shaped by experience. Ethan felt something shift inside him again. But this time it was sharper, because the woman standing there was not someone he had lost recently, she was someone he had failed long before he realized her worth. And as the applause filled the room, one realization settled deeper than any before it: she had not just moved on, she had become someone entirely beyond his reach, and the space between them was no longer something time could close. The applause faded, but Ethan did not move, because something inside him had already crossed a line he could not return from. And as the room slowly resumed its rhythm, he found himself walking toward her without planning to, without thinking, driven by something that had been building for years without being named. Naomi stepped down from the stage with the same quiet composure, acknowledging people with a calm nod, her presence steady, untouched by the attention surrounding her. And when Ethan finally stood in front of her, the contrast between them felt undeniable, not in status, not in appearance, but in clarity. For a brief second, neither of them spoke, and in that silence, everything that had once been ignored now stood fully visible. Ethan's voice, when it came, was lower than usual, stripped of certainty, as he said her name like it still belonged to him, but it did not land the same way anymore. Naomi looked at him, not with anger, not with pain, but with a calm understanding that felt more distant than either, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time without needing anything from him. He tried to explain, not with excuses, but with fragments of realization, words about mistakes, about not seeing, about understanding too late. But even as he spoke, he could hear how insufficient they sounded, how they belonged to a version of the story that had already ended. Naomi listened without interrupting, her silence no longer heavy, but settled, owned, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, measured, carrying no resentment, only truth. As she said that understanding something late does not change what was done when it mattered, the words did not cut, they clarified, and in that clarity, Ethan felt the full weight of what he had lost, not in that moment, but in every moment before it when he had chosen not to act. He asked for another chance, not loudly, not desperately, but with a quiet hope that did not match reality, and Naomi held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, not to reconsider, but to make sure he understood. She told him that she had not left because she was weak. She had left because she finally understood her worth, and once that happens, there is no path back to a place that required her to shrink. The space between them felt final, not because of distance, but because of direction, and as she turned to leave, there was no hesitation in her steps, no pause for what could have been, only movement forward. Ethan remained where he was, surrounded by light, by voices, by everything he had once believed defined success, and for the first time, it all felt secondary, because the one thing that had given meaning to it had already walked away, and as Naomi disappeared into the crowd, not lost but fully present in a life she had rebuilt on her own terms, one truth settled with a permanence Ethan could not escape: he had not just lost her, he had finally understood her at the exact moment she no longer needed him to.